And this is going to be a drive-by lecture because there's no way that you can talk about two subjects, critical race theory and DEI, in 45 to 50 minutes. But we're going to give it a try. All right. And then I'll send you home with homework and you can finish looking it up. These subjects are distinct. So I'm going to start with critical race theory, and we're going to end up with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that all right before we end today? Now, why would they invite somebody like me to something like this to talk about theory? When you say theory, people's eyes generally glaze over. Well, we are here to talk about theory, law, and critical race theory because theory undergirds everything we do. And for a definition of theory, lawyers always like to have their definitions there. Theory, which is a supposition or system of ideas intended to explain something or a set of principles on which the practice or activity is based. There is a theory, if there is a theory out there that Black lives don't matter, then we will continue to have the Michael Browns, the George Floyds, the Sandra Blands, and Ferguson. That's why we're here today, to talk about what is it that creates these situations. Now, as a teacher, and you never get out of the practice of asking questions. So I'm going to ask a whole lot of questions today. Is that all right? Okay, here's the first thing. Can anybody tell me who said those who make you believe in absurdities can make you commit atrocities? Anybody know who said that? Huh? Well, it was a guy by the name of Voltaire. Look it up when you go back home. He was a Frenchman back in the, I believe, the 17th century in France. He said that. Okay, here's the second question. All right, you're 0 and 0. Who said the past is never dead? It's not even the past. Who said that? It was an author, American writer named Faulkner. Ever heard of Faulkner? He said that. And finally, who said an unexamined life is not worth living? Who said that? I hear some mumbling out there. Well, y'all got a whole lot of homework to do. That was a guy by the name of Socrates. He lived in Athens, Greece between 470 and 399 BC. He's known to have been one of the greatest Western philosophers of ethical thought. He wrote nothing, absolutely nothing, but walked around the area picking up students. He was accused of corrupting the youth, and he was a very polarizing figure. We know about him only because of the writings of Plato. Thank you very much. The writings of Plato and Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, this is why it's important to us, is said to have influenced the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas and maybe even St. Paul. Now, Socrates walked around town with his students, and he was always constantly asking, what is this? That question eventually got him arrested for corrupting the youth, worshiping false gods, and not worshiping the state religion. He was given the death penalty. He was offered a chance to escape it by friends, but he refused. He decided to drink the hemlock. Now, why am I telling you this? What does Socrates have to do with Ferguson? Here we're going to connect the dots in just a minute. Socrates' inquiry, his method, still lives today. It did not die with Socrates. Now, how many of you who went to college or even high school took philosophy, logic, all of that? Anybody in the room? All right, okay, all right. I'm not amongst strangers. The method in law school for teaching students is Socrates' method on steroids. Do any of you remember seeing an old TV program called Paper Chase, where the professor would hammer these students and ask them this and ask them that until they were almost to tears? Or more recently, for the young folks in the room, do you all remember Viola Davis as Annalise Keating in How to Get Away with Murder? Okay. In both of those series, The Socratic method is exaggerated for artistic reasons. Students are peppered with questions, and they often had the same dumb looks on their faces as I did when I was going to law school. All right, for those of you who don't watch popular culture, have you ever listened to a Supreme Court argument? Oral argument. You may notice that a lot of questions are posed by the justices, so much that the advocates, the lawyers, can barely get an answer out to the last question before they're asked another question. You ever notice that? Blame it on Socrates. He purportedly started the whole thing. Even Jesus in the Gospels, long after Socrates, asked a lot of questions. Some have counted them. Can anybody guess how many there are questions that Jesus asked among the time when he was here? 307. That's the last count. Let's listen to a couple of them. Who do you say that I am? What do you want me to do for you? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? To what can I compare this generation? Do you not understand? Do you love me? Each of these questions is pregnant with lessons, principles, and knowledge. So when I taught students full time, I would ask them, do you know the 3-year-old rule? I'm going to ask you all, do you all know what the 3-year-old rule is? And they would look frantically in their papers and trying to say, I don't remember seeing that in the discussion for today. Where is that? Does anybody here have a 3-year-old? Used to? Okay. All right. You got a 3-year-old? Let me just ask you, what's their favorite one-word word? Why? Ooh, y'all on it today. All right. Why? They want to know why. And usually answering that question, we'll get ready from a video, will send you down a dark cave of questions from which you will never escape until completely exasperated, you find yourself uttering the words, what? Because I said so. So I would tell students, when looking at a case and on an exam, they should try to answer as many whys as possible. That would make the difference between a C and a D grade and an A and a B grade. One of my favorite scenes from a movie, a classic called, anybody ever seen the movie Uncle Buck? It's not one that's very memorable, but one of my favorite laughs I get from this movie, and it's when Macaulay Culkin, as a little boy, peppers John Candy, the irresponsible Uncle Buck Russell, who is babysitting with a lot of questions. Can you play that for me, please?
Where do you live?
In the city.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
Own or rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid. That's my job.
Thank you. Miles has got the method down. Now, keep asking until you get the answers and get some satisfaction. Make a perfect law student. Now, today's discussion is about questions. Why some are asked and others are not. What is it about the facts that we refuse to handle? Why are we scared to look under the covers to determine whether the boogeyman really exists? Or if we just turn on the light, we would find out that what we're really wrestling with are shadows. I was watching an actor's studio interview with Viola Davis. Y'all know who Viola Davis is, right? And she said this: we are not good at messy truths. My question is, how long can we afford to not stare truth in the face, not deal with the facts? One more illustration before we get to the meat of this. How many of you have ever been in the car with the kids on vacation and you got two kids sitting in the back and one looks at the other and then they holler out? What do they holler out? Are we there yet? What's the second question? What do they say? What's their complaint? Tell them to stop what? Stop looking at me. Stop looking at me. And you wonder, and you just got out the driveway and you got 400 miles to go with these kids talking about all this kind of stuff. And you want to know, why is the gaze so unnerving? Can there be some messy truths inside that gaze that the child is complaining about. And as a practical matter, it is the gaze that we as a nation avoid in our family, in ourselves, our churches, our government, our history, because it can sometimes be very painful. All right. So here is your next question. And this is a multiple choice question. I'll read it to you for those of you who might not be able to see it. It says, the law is neutral. Critical race theory argues that the law is neutral and objective, providing equal protection and opportunities for all individuals. Racial inequality is the result of individual prejudices and actions and not systemic structures. C, the law plays a fundamental role in the maintenance of racial hierarchies and is shaped by social, political, and economic power dynamics. And D, race and racism are fixed, biologically determined categories that cannot be changed. All right, so you see the four categories, A, B, C, D. Holler out your answer in terms of letters. What's the right answer to this? C? Okay. Any other offers? Yes, it is C. That is what critical race theory argues. Now, on September 22nd, 2020, former President Trump issued an executive order excluding from federal contracts any diversity and inclusion training interpreted as divisive concepts. Now, again, I'm going to talk about DEI later, but this is what he did. Here's how he justified it. Quote, many people are pushing for a different vision of America that is grounded in hierarchies based on collective social and political identities rather than on the inherent and equal dignity of every person as an individual. This ideology is rooted in the pernicious and false belief that America is irredeemably racist and sexist, and that some people, simply on account of their race or sex, are oppressors, and that racial and sexual identities are more important than our common status as human beings and Americans. That was the basis for him sending out the executive order. For those of you who don't know what an executive order, it is the power of the president to control basically executive agencies that he's responsible for. It is not legislative power, but he did that nevertheless. Well, when President Biden came in, he immediately repealed it. But here is what happened. In 2021, multiple states began to pass legislation to limit the topics that can be explored in public school classrooms. And at the top of the list was critical race theory. When you look at some of the footage of the January 6th riots, you see cards saying CRT. You remember that? Rick Santos of Florida restricted discussions of race, gender, and sexual orientation in classrooms. And Florida, they blocked an AP American Studies course from being offered in high schools. The article that I was reading went on to say that over the 22-23 school year, 60 schools across the nation began testing out the college level course, taking it out as a part of a pilot program. And when asked why in Florida they did this is what they said: that the class significantly lacks educational value and goes against state law. Officials did not explain their reasoning to the college board. So first of all, if you take nothing else out of this presentation, here's what I want you to know. Myth number one: critical race theory is or was being taught in the public school system. That is a myth. That is a lie. Critical race theory is not taught at the K through 12 level, or even for the most part at the undergraduate level. That is not what is taught. Go to the next slide, please, and I'll explain why later. Critical race myth number two: that it was created to make white people feel badly about themselves and their race. Myth number two. So the question becomes, why is CRT such a lightning rod? Well, let me explain a little bit how CRT came into being. It grew out of critical race theory, or CRT, grew out of critical legal studies, uh, excuse me, movement of the 1970s and 80s, which dealt with class, economic structure, and law. Critical legal studies is considered by some to be the first movement in American law and legal theory to take a more progressive look at the law, basically what it means and what it does. The presentation we saw this morning that Professor Dean Gardner gave us could be classified as a part of that movement where you look at not just what is supposed to be objective law, but why the law is operating the way it does. Legal scholars were concerned about the relationship of legal scholarship and practice to the struggle of human beings, trying to make the society more egalitarian and democratic. In short, these scholars wanted to challenge the status quo beliefs and the practices of law. That's what they did. Critical legal studies. Now, next slide. Critical race theory is the child of CLS, or critical legal studies, and it's a specialized intellectual field established in the 1980s and 90s by colleagues of mine, including, and you may have heard some of these legal scholars' names: Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, Gene Stefani, Kimberly Crenshaw, Neil Gatanya, Adrian Wing, Stephanie Phillips, on and on and on. They emphasize the unique role that legal systems play in upholding and creating racial inequalities in the United States. That's what we heard this morning. It is a slide, please. It is a cross-disciplinary examination. Now, let's break down what this critical race theory means. And I'm going to step over here so I can see a little better. The word critical in the name is an academic reference to critical thinking, critical theory, and scholarly criticism. The scholarly criticism you heard this morning is an example of that. Rather than criticizing and blaming people. That's what critical means. Well, if somebody says, well, what does critical mean? You often hear professors and people saying, I wish people could think more critically. You've heard that before, right? All right. To think critically is to have the ability to analyze information objectively and evaluate it to form a reasoned judgment. It involves questioning assumptions, recognizing biases, identifying logical connections between ideas, and assessing the credibility of evidence. Next slide, please. Turn my page here. When you talk about credibility, you're often talking about, another word for credibility is truth. You hear often in trials, you said, was that witness credible? Another way of saying it, do you think that witness was telling the truth? So what is truth? Truth, I think that's what I've got it is. And they always said it's wrong to define a word with the same word, but we're going to do that today. What is truth? That which is true, that which is not false, in accordance with fact and reality, includes all facts about it, rather than things that are imagined or invented. Now, according to Kimberly Crenshaw, one of the founding scholars of this movement, CRT, critical race theory, is a verb. It's not a noun. It is not diversity and inclusion training. It critiques, it criticizes, it examines, it observes how social construction of race and institutional racism, or if I may add the words institutional castes, relegate people of color to the bottom tiers of society. A key concept in critical race theory is something called intersectionality, the way in which different forms of inequality and identity are affected by the interconnections of race, gender, class, disability, etc. So what does that mean? Let me break that down for everybody. So when you think of yourself as a person, This gentleman right here, how would you describe yourself? Huh? Faster? No, I mean pastor. Oh, pastor. Okay. What description would you give yourself? What are you? No, what are you? Okay, you're lovable. Okay, that's a characteristic. You're a black woman. I got a pastor, a black woman. Do I have any mothers here, fathers here, sisters here, workers here? You get the drift? Okay, so that intersectionality deals with how do all these things come together, because in any person, we are multiple persons. We have multiple identities. I'm a black female now from the West Coast. I'm a little older than most people in the room, and so on and so forth. So what does that mean? Critical race theory recognizes that racism, particularly institutionalized racism, is not a thing of the past. All right, can you go to my second video now? This is what old racism used to kind of look like.
God forgives murder and he forgives adultery, but he is very angry and he actually curses all who do integrate.
That's when I saw the photograph. On every newspaper kiosk on that wide tree-shaped boulevard in Paris were photographs of 15-year-old Dorothy Counts being reviled and spat upon by the mob as she was making her way to school in Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's what old racism, I hesitate to say, used to look like. But just yesterday, just before I flew in, someone shared with me, and I couldn't get it up and running, a TikTok on where somebody was being interviewed, was basically doing the same kind of stuff on his own. And what you will find, I hope we have time to talk about this during the next session, the plenary. There is a connection between what you just saw there and what is happening in this country today. More about that later if I get the time. But we rarely see this kind of open hostility and animus displayed publicly in mass that way. However, next slide. The Bible was used by churches to justify the idolatry of white supremacy. And here are some of the reasons listed in the Bible. The Bible tells me so. The mark of Cain. That's Adam, talking about Adam and Eve's son. You remember the mark of Cain? They said that what happened there was when he got that mark, Cain and his descendants turned into black people, and that's why they need to be subjugated. And if that wasn't enough, the misrepresentation of Noah's curse, and I say misrepresentation of Noah's curse on Canaan, not Ham. There's no such thing as the curse of Ham. And I recently heard about in one of the Sabbath school lessons, somebody referred to the case, the curse of Ham. Please tell them that does not exist. Just like Hannibal Lecter, it doesn't exist. While fewer whites still cling to the notion, anything associated with blackness and black culture, anything, including, and this is just a diversion, liturgical culture in churches is at best inferior and at worst anathema to whiteness. Whiteness is closest to God. The more white you can be, the closer you are. You remember, some of y'all as old as me, or maybe older, remember, what was the saying? Black stay back, white get around, however that thing went. Yeah, that. So the closer you can be to white, the closer you are to God, and therefore whiteness is holiness. Think about that. After all, Jesus was white. Now I ain't saying that. That's what they say. Okay. And so so they use the Bible as an example of why they continue to be racist. Now, so what is racism? We always talk about, people say, I'm not racist. Scholar Robert Livingston says this: it occurs when individuals or institutions show more favorable evaluation or treatment of an individual or group based on race or ethnicity. He further says that racism is more about what people do rather than who they are. The intent of the person is irrelevant. It's the effect, it's the impact that makes the difference. So let me move on to the next slide. It gives you some fundamental questions that are embedded in critical race theory. Since we now know that it is not taught at the public school level, they may teach Black history or American history or something, but they're not teaching critical race theory simply because for the reason that students at that age are not capable of doing it. Law students are almost not capable of doing it. All right. Here's some fundamental questions. How does the law construct race? How has the law protected racism and upheld racial hierarchies? How does the law reproduce racial inequality? How can the law be used to dismantle racism and racial inequality? Next slide, please. Those are some of the questions. And here are the fundamental beliefs that are universally held by crits. That's the people who do the scholarship. They call them crits. 1, racism in the United States is common, ordinary experience of most people of color. 2, legal advances or setbacks for people of color tend to serve the dominant group's interests. 3, race is not a biological but socially constructed to benefit dominant groups. 4, dominant groups stereotype minority groups to favor their needs and interests. 5, no one, and we discovered this in this room, has a single identity. Black people can also identify themselves by religion, sexual orientation, nationality. And 6, the experience of members of minority groups qualify them to speak out against racism. Now, and I'm going to break in a minute and let you ask some questions. How much more time do I have? Okay. 12:45. And what time is? Oh, good. I'm good. All right, good. Some of the principles, according to a woman by the name of Kira Bridges, include, in terms of what I just mentioned, but this issue of race, more and more people are beginning to understand that it is not biologically real, but socially constructed. The Human Genome Project, you all know about Human Genome, where they map the DNA and all of that. Okay, here's what they discovered. They say that of all the 7.8 billion human cousins alive today, we have 99.9% overlap in the DNA, and that the 0.1% genetic variability that exists are not adequately explained by traditional categories such as Black, whites, Asians, Native America, etc. In fact, they say that the range of genetic differences among individuals of the same race is far greater than the average differences between any two racial groups. What did I just say? What I said was this. Between groups that we typically think of ethnic groups, we have more in common in terms of our DNA than me and most of the folks in this room. That's what they're saying. That's the biological explanation. Next slide, please. And these are just more comments about racism. Racism is a modern conception. If you go back thousands of years ago, back to Socrates, the idea of race didn't really exist. Didn't exist. When we think about even biblical times, when we think about race today and race then, it's not the same thing. Race really became a concept, and particularly the white race became a concept on these shores. Because prior to that, in Europe, people were French, German, Italian, Irish, whatever it is. They didn't think of themselves per se as white. They were thought of when they got here, and I don't have time to go in it today because that is indeed African American history or American history. Bacon's Rebellion, look it up. Bacon's Rebellion is what made the great divide between telling who is what Well, who's on this side of the line is African American, and who's on that side of the line is white. But I digress. Now, depending on who you are or where you were at the time that you lived, what were the political, sociological, and economic factors, and who was in charge, your assignment to racial category could change. For example, I have any Italians in the room? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I don't offend nobody. Polish, Armenians, Irish, none of them were considered white. None of them. When these groups did become white and why, CRT, critical race theory, explores those kinds of questions. Okay. How is it that people from Africa and other countries where people of color originate from become the dominant groups in the lowest castes of American society? How does that affect how we deal with people economically, politically, medically, criminally, etc. today? One example that comes to mind, I recently read where Serena Williams was delivering her baby. Did y'all hear about that? And she had blood clots, and they kept telling her she was crazy, and the woman almost died. Now, here's the question. I want to know, if Serena can't get no help, what does that say for the rest of us? Does the myth that the black woman can endure more pain than anybody else have anything to do with it? Maybe or maybe not. But the question needs to be asked. You hear all of this discussion about the abortion debates. Women of color are the predominant folks who are bleeding out in these parking lots. People not saying that. And so CRT would say, why is that happening? Why is that a phenomenon? Next slide, please. Isabel Wilkerson defines caste. Caste is granting or withholding of respect, status, honor, attention, privileges, resources, benefit of the doubt, and human kindness to someone on the basis of their perceived rank or standing in the hierarchy. That's what she says. At the end of this presentation, if I get to it, there are a list of books that you can, I have put up on the screen that you can read more about it, since we're doing this drive-by this morning. Next slide. All right. Here's the next quiz. All right. The city enacts a zoning law. I'm going to see how well you can apply CRT now. The city enacts a zoning law that restricts multifamily units in certain neighborhoods. The neighborhoods where multifamily housing is prohibited are predominantly white and affluent, while the areas where development is allowed are predominantly minority and low income. You all understand that much so far? Got that? All right, here's the next part. A community organization challenges the zoning law, arguing it perpetuates racial segregation and violates the fair housing law. Everybody got that? Everybody got the question? Got that part of the question? Okay, here's the actual question. Next slide, please. Which of the following arguments reflect a critical race theory perspective on cities' zoning law? A, the zoning law is justified as a legitimate exercise of government power to regulate land. B, the zoning law, which is race neutral on its face, reinforces historical patterns of racial segregation and economic inequality by limiting affordable housing in white neighborhoods. C, the zoning law should be upheld unless there is an explicit evidence there is an intent to discriminate based on race. And D, the zoning law is valid because it applies equally to all residents regardless of race and is not explicitly discriminatory. All right. How many say the answer is A? How many say it is B? Are you A or B? B. Okay. How many say it is C? And how many say it is D? All right. The answer is B. Y'all go and get your law degrees. Go on with your bad selves. Crits, people who do critical race theory, look at the limitations of the legal efforts to address racial inequality. I don't have time to go into it today, but one of the very first founders, help me with his name, Professor Derek Bell. He talked about, for example, the flaw in Brown. We were all happy and excited by Brown, that we didn't have to put up with that, what we saw in that video in terms of the crowd in Little Rock, North Carolina, jeering and that sort of thing. But folks are still mad about that, and that's why we've got Christian nationalism. I'll make the tie at the lunchtime. But he did say there were some flaws in it. I mean, for example, what happened to our Black administrators and teachers? What kind of assessments are our children being assessed under that produce a narrative that our children aren't educable? What kind of school discipline policies are there that disproportionately impact students of color? So on and so forth. Now, if those questions are asked, here's some questions that I've got. And I'm going to run through these real quick, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions for this part before I move to DEI. How about these questions? How about housing, employment, medicine, economics, criminal justice? What questions should we be asking? For example, the median white household has 13 times more the wealth of the median African American household. Why is that? Or why are house appraisals often much lower for African American homes than white homes, no matter where they live? Why is that? How much wealth was stolen and destroyed when whole communities of African Americans had to leave their possessions behind to save their lives from rioting whites many times in the 20th century? Why will it take 228 years for Black Americans to reach the level of wealth that white households enjoy today? Could it be because of an institutionalized privilege based on caste, which major feature is race as defined historically and now? Or could there be something else going on? I mean, did I just miss it? Or what? Why do African American motorists, and we did not consult on this, but it was in my notes. Why do they fear for their lives when they're pulled over by the police? If it's not race, then what is it? And if it's not race, we need to find out. How do our policies not only work a detriment to those who are permanently assigned to the lower caste system, but how are these laws, policies, traditions affecting the entire nation's progress? Why can't or won't people who have benefited from centuries of entitlement as a group based on the way they look not understand that when a wrong has been perpetuated, the usual thing to do for moral and legal reasons is to provide a remedy? These are the kinds of questions that CRT tries to, first of all, identify and then to answer and unravel. It may not be that we don't want to ask the questions. It may just be that we don't want to ask these kinds of questions. Can you go to the next slide and go ahead?
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events.
Stop it there.
And
that's the monkey business illusion. I asked why people aren't focused on this stuff is because they're busy. They've been told to look at this. It's an old magician's trick. Watch me do this, and this hand is doing that all along. Stealing, killing, but watch this over here. And in fact, I'm going to give you out of the mouth of one of the right-wing strategists for Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, how he explained it. Now, I think everybody in this room was over 18. Anybody here under 18? Okay. This is not raw, but it's real. And I'm going to read it just like he said it. Is that okay? All right, here's what he said. You start out in 1954 by saying nigga, nigga, nigga. But by 1968, you can't say nigga. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff, and you're getting so abstract. Now we're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this. Much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigga nigga. So years ago, the enemy was busing or welfare mothers or boogeyman or I forgot the name of that. When Bush Daddy was running and they put that picture of the guy up, looked like the criminal. Willie Horton. Anything could be conjured up then. Today it's CRT, and tomorrow, when that's run its course, that it'll be something else. And it's all because we refuse to look at the messy truths. And in order to do that, you've got to ask questions. In terms of CRT, the method is as old as Socrates. It's not about asking questions. It's about the questions people don't want asked or answered. With that said, let me just read, if you could go back, let me see, maybe I can pull it up here. I want to read one thing that, if I can find it quickly, and then I'm going to open it up to questions for about 5 minutes, and then I've got to do the second part of this, which is not going to take long at all. But there was, if you can, if you have the opportunity, I don't know how many you have seen the I Am Not Your Negro by James Baldwin. Go back and review that. And because it is so insightful in terms of what he says. And one of the things he said, there are days when you wonder what your role in this country and what your future is in it. How precisely are you going to reconcile yourself to your situation here? And how are you going to communicate to the vast, heedless white majority that you are here? I am terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long, they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. This means they have become in themselves moral monsters. James Baldwin said that in the 1960s. All right. With that said, that's what critical race theory gets at. It's about questioning and providing theories to explain why things are the way they are. With that said, let me take your questions before we move on. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Based on the information that you have been given, does this mean that, in a way, racism and critical thinking, like it has evolved constantly into something different? Or is it the same thing based on it's yourself, but you just have a different outfit on? Or there has been some changes which has been getting worse and deeper and worse?
Well, I can't speak for what all race critics would say, but I'd say this: the ideology has not changed. And while I'm talking about racism in this context, because that's what I was asked to talk about, but you could plug in other isms too, and that doesn't change. The methodology may change. They may dress it up. It is systemic. It has not gone away. It ebbs and flows depending upon what's going on. So I guess I'll say, like the kids say, same stuff, different day, different method. Yes, sir.
Um, yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about color blindness theory in the same moment that we have.
I'm going to do that in just a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
So should I?
No,
well, maybe I'll
do your
just-
question because
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, we have this moment where you're not supposed to talk about race. You're not supposed to talk about critical race theory. We have legislation to that end. And the explanation is, well, we want to live in a colorblind society. And so I guess I just want to get your take on how the notion of colorblindness is working in conjunction with this anti-CRT movement.
Okay, very good question. And the short answer is it's not working very well for me at all. And as we go through this, maybe this will illuminate it just a bit more. And if not, ask the question again. Okay. All right. Another question? Yeah. Go ahead. Who's next? Who's up to bat?
Okay, there seems to be a lot of pushback with the critical race theory because some are saying we're not celebrating the success. We're still trying to dig up, the reparations that still need to be done, things of that nature. How do you combat that? Because, I know this is not about making white kids feel bad or whatever, but they say it's the same old thing. We've gotten a president that's black. We've done all of that, and they see no need for it there.
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting. It depends on how you measure success. Okay, are you truly successful? And do you look around? Have we succeeded in the way that we should, based on what we say? If I'm trying to do this correctly, and I'm not a philosopher or a logics person, but I believe what I was taught was if there's one part of the statement that's incorrect, the statement is incorrect. You can't have true and false in the same. They can't live together. There's no compatibility. So there has not been, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second when I get to my other notes about remedies. When people talk about, well, why are we still talking about this? It's because the problem has never been solved. When you saw, and people say, well, why you got to play the race card? I said, well, quit dealing it to me. All you good rook players out there, deal me something else. I'll play that. Right? Yes. Question.
You mentioned about the caste system earlier.
Yes.
There's a book that was written by Isabel Wilkinson.
Yes, I made reference to it. Yes.
Origin of Our Discontent.
Yes.
And it kind of compare the caste system or the racism that exists here with India.
That's right. It's in that book. Yes, that was the book I was making reference to. It's an excellent book. I'd admonish everybody to read it. There's a lady in the plum back there as well. Okay. And then I'll move on.
When we look at critical race theory, what do you think the main fear is with our white population? What I think the main fear, what I think it is, it's a fear for their children to understand how horrible they are as a race, is what they've done. And they don't want their children to know the truth. So therefore, they're taking everything out that people of color have done. We might as well say we built America.
We did.
So they don't want them to know that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing. But how do they counteract that? How do we get the truth out and continue to bring the truth out?
Well, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. But the shorthand is being ever vigilant. The devil don't like the truth. I don't know why this is so hard to understand. He never, the reason why we're in the mess we're in today is because of the original big lie. And the Bible says he is the father of lies. So it doesn't surprise me much when people who aren't committed to not be like that lie. it is almost it's almost expected. In fact, I was on a panel. Pastor Woods had me on a panel not too long ago when this latest Supreme Court affirmative action thing came down for the kids, taking the affirmative action away, and people were startled and they were upset and gnashing of teeth. And I said, wait a minute, they've been working on this since 1975. Where y'all been? The devil never sleeps, never. And so, more specifically to your question as to why people don't want to deal with this, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to give you a list of reasons why I think and others think that they don't want to deal with it. Part of it has to do with selfishness. Part of it is, I don't know. It's kind of like you hurt, right? You hurt yourself, like I did a couple of weeks ago. I stepped on something or something bit me, I don't know. And my foot hurt. And I couldn't figure out, why is my foot hurting? So finally, I took myself to the doctor. Now, it would have been crazy for me to go into the doctor and say, my foot hurts, and then the doctor's going to ask you, well, what'd you do? And I don't want to talk about it. It hurts. I don't want to talk about it. And they take the blood work and they come back and it says, well, look like you got some poison in your body. I don't want to talk about it. That's too painful. And he said, well, what do you say? I don't want to talk about it because I don't want my children to know what happened. It's crazy. That's what it is. That's the technical term for it. But I'll get to the more specifics in just a bit. Yes, 2 more, and then I've got to move on.
Yeah, I thank you for the presentation, and I think you've made clear that critical race theory is a framework for understanding how law is dealt in America, and I think you've made clear to say it's not being taught on the elementary level because it can't be. However, it is a framework that governs how children are taught.
Yes.
So my question is, how do we, after knowing that, teach our children in such a way that they get these principles so they know how to move through the system and know who they are?
Well, let me just give an example, and I know this isn't necessarily practical, but y'all ever heard of Hebrew school? Anybody know what Hebrew school is? Okay, that's where the little children go, the Jewish children, parents who are concerned about the children knowing who they are, what their history is. They send them kids in the afternoon, and on Saturday or Sunday, they go there and they learn. They're taught, because if they're in public schools, they're not learning that. If they're not in a school that doesn't appreciate, or a church that does not appreciate their culture, they're not learning that. Years ago, we used to learn this stuff in church. I don't know, maybe I know I'm 500 years old, but when I was coming along, we had Black History Month before there was Black History Month. It was taught in church. Well, people don't go to church anymore. So you have to have institutions that constantly remind, because people die off. You hear some of the crazy stuff out there today, you're going, did I make this? Wasn't that in 1955? They said that, and this is what, 2025, and it echoes back. So a constant vigilance has to go on. No, they're not going to understand all the nuances of critical race theory, but Miles had the thing down in the film. Why? And you just keep explaining until there are no more whys. One more question, and then I'm going to move on. 2 more questions.
I wanted to speak to your comment on intersectionality, and what the lawyer over here was saying about erasing the color blindness, right? The color blindness. Intersectionality keeps us from having that color blindness, because if you, and I had to deal with this in my class, if you erase the fact that I am Black, you erase a part of me.
That's right.
That is who I am.
That's right.
I cannot separate the fact that I am a Black woman, American woman, pastor's wife. Like, that is who I am. So when we get caught up in this, oh, I'm colorblind, rebuke that. Okay? Rebuke that. That's a racist connotation, and we ought not to accept that.
Okay, last question, quickly.
Can I get one more after Pastor
Oh,
Reed?
okay.
Thank you.
I'm cutting this down. Go
Let me
ahead.
just apologize ahead of time because mine is. I'm gonna do my best to make it brief.
Go ahead, brother.
but I promise it ain't gonna be. I'm a practitioner of the very things that you're teaching, right? I'm on the DEI committee of a couple of different institutions. One of the things that I find is they are having these committees in order to check the boxes.
Right.
So one of them is at a hospital where I work, and they have a DEI committee because the Joint Commission for the State of California said by January 2023, you had to have a DEI committee in every hospital in the state of California. Great state, by the way, of California. But what I find is, and here's my struggle, everything you're saying is so spot on, is as soon as these conversations arise, the earplugs go in of our cousins, not our brothers and sisters, but of our white patriots. The question that I have with that is how to move the needle in mixed ethnic group environments around these conversations in order to have some actual progress.
Okay, that is a long question, and it takes a long explanation. But in short, I really need more facts. But the question becomes: are you really serious about this for that group? Are you serious about this, or are we here to check the boxes? And it depends on how courageous you want to be. You know, do you want to lose your job or not get promoted or whatever? But here's how you figure out whether an institution is serious or not. Always 1240. Oh gosh. Isn't it 1240 now? Okay. Always look for where the DEI person is in the organization chart. If the DEI person is way down in HR, answering to the third vice president of the second cousin of the brother, they ain't serious. They're not serious. And you can just save your time. But if your governing body, whether it's the board of trustees of a university, law school, whatever it is, hospital, if they say, as part of our strategic plan for the future, this is what we want to do, right? Then you know that they really have some interest in it. And we're going to hold people's feet accountable, meaning paychecks, to get this done. Because if they can send somebody to the moon and if they can map the human body, they can figure out this question. It ain't that hard, right? So you have to figure out where you are in the scenario. Do they really mean this? And you can look at what they spend their money on, who they promote, what they promote, what they say. All of those things will be factors to let you know how serious they are about it. Then you take your next steps. And I need to finish, so I'll talk to you about that more later on. But is that enough to start with? Okay. All right. So I got 2 minutes to finish. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Very quick comment.
So we won't get to DEI. I'll give you, but go ahead.
To suggest that we're colorblind is to suggest that there's only one color in the rainbow.
Okay. And you get to pick what it is, right? Okay. So I want to get to the answer. Go to slide number 23 for me, because I got to get out of here. Y'all have to have me back to do the real DEI. I was going to give you the... So what does it take for equality or fairness? This comes out of Robert Livingston's book, The Conversation, which would be an excellent book for you to pick up to answer that question in more detail. You see, I don't know how well you can see, how everybody on the left, on the left, they have the same number of blocks. But you see what their vision is of the field? Everybody's vision is not can't see. So it takes, you go to the next picture, and it takes for them, no, not the next slide. Go back. You see how when they all have a level vision, that the playing field is moderated based on what their needs are to be able to see. And so the point is that fairness requires more than equality. It requires equity. Next slide, please. Here's an analysis also based on Livingston. do I understand what the problem is and where it comes from? You got to be aware of what the problem is, first of all, before you can do anything. I don't want no doctor treating me that doesn't know that it's not my left arm, but my right arm that's hurting, right? Okay. 2, do I care enough about the problem and the people it harms? Empathy. Because some people just don't care. They don't care. Number 3, do I know how to correct the problem and am I willing to do it? That takes strategy, that takes sacrifice, it takes prayer to do that. Next slide. I'll just read it quick. Past events do not impact the present or future. We know that's false. People without direct involvement in slavery have no role in creating or perpetuating the systemic racism. We also know that's false for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. Okay. Why apathy? And that's what this lady over here asked. Why apathy or hostility about systemic isms, racism, sexism? First of all, there are many folks that don't believe that discrimination exists. They don't believe it. I don't know where they've been, but they don't believe it. Secondly, belief that the Bible supports and or mandates discrimination. You should hear more about that within the next hour, I guess. 3, tribalism. My group against your group. Darwinism, that's what it is, just plain Darwinism. 4, disbelief that they have a personal role in perpetuating it. I ain't got nothing to do with that, so, I'm not going to do anything about it. Next slide, please. Final questions, and here for the pastors in the room. This is what I've been waiting on. And everybody, what is the moral cost of perpetuating racism, sexism in and outside the church? We don't have time for a discussion today. You'll have to have me back to do that. Secondly, what responsibility as a pastor, teacher, etc., do I have in educating church members and others and redressing this issue in my church and communities? We heard a lot about that last night, right? Okay. 3, if Jesus were to come back now, where would he be on the social justice issue? And in essence, that's what I was talking about, social justice in a much more specific way. But this whole thing is about social justice. What would he say about the isms? What would he say? Where would he be? I ain't gonna ask you how he'd vote, but where would he be on these issues? And it doesn't take a biblical scholar to figure that out. All you need to do is sit under 2 or 3 good sermons, and I think we could all figure that out, right? Next slide, please. Okay, 5 action steps, quickly. Social engagement, encourage people to vote. Secondly, get people to educate themselves as to where and how they are spending their money. If a manufacturer or business person is going to disparage my people, I'm not spending no money with them. Mentor the young people, please, 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 in your Hebrew schools, teach them civics, teach them how the government works, so they have an understanding of what they need to do. Number 4, protest if necessary. And number 5, make financial contributions to organizations that are trying to make a difference. Next slide. Lastly, read more about it. I wanted to put that up because these are the number of some of the books that I consulted when I was putting together this presentation. The earlier books, the older books, the critical race books, I have articles by Derek Bell, myself, and others from the 1990s. But the conversation is there, Caste is there, The Color of Law is there, and We Are Not All Saved, which was the first, I think it was the first book that Derek Bell published and wrote on critical race theory, which is an excellent, excellent book. It may be hard to come by. You may have to try to read, because some of these may be out of print now, but that's that. Now, let me go back lastly to Professor Gardner. Did I answer your question? All right. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. I commend you for coming today. I hope you, can I just hear before we could, did anybody get any takebacks? Just takebacks. Anybody got something they're going to take back? What are you going to take back? Yes. Okay. All right. Anything else? Well, I know I said a mouthful. You may feel like you were drinking from a fire hydrant, but God bless you and keep you. Keep that justice going. Thank you so much.